See, I told you we'd be back. Dan Labbe alongside Chris Fedor. We are approaching the Browns pick. The Buffalo Bills are making their pick currently. We'll wait to see what they will do. Jim Kelly, of course, they love him in Buffalo. He's getting huge applause as he announces this pick. He is, for Browns fans who don't know, the way we think of Bernie Kosar, that's
right.
how people in Buffalo think of Jim Kelly to try and make that parallel. What do you think Buffalo's doing?
I have no idea, Dan. They are one of the wild cards.
How about Ronald Darby?
Well, is that who they're going with?
Yep.
Cornerback, Ronald Darby from Florida State. They were always one of the wild cards because they didn't have that first-round pick. The first-round pick went to the Browns. So you get Darby guy, track speed, world-class athlete. So if you're talking about somebody who gets beat, he's going to make that up because of his speed. The thing that he's going to have to work on is the other things, and he's got to avoid being so grabby. He gets a little bit grabby downfield, and it's going to be called much, much closer in the NFL. But he was one of those cornerbacks, one of the group that could go here in the second round.
And it sounds like the Browns are going Nate Orchard out of Utah with their pick. Of course, we'll wait. That's not official yet, but plenty of reports out there that Nate Orchard will be the pick for the Cleveland Browns. So, no receiver.
No receiver. Instead, the Browns go with that pass rusher.
Yep.
And we talked about Orchard as the player. He was the one that gave Andrus Peat some big-time problems. Got him twice in that game against Stanford. And I would guess you could ask Pete, a top 15 player, which guy gave you the most trouble this past year when you were trying to block him. And I think he would say Nate Orchard. Now, there's only 1 year of production here with him. It was big-time production. He was tied for the lead in sacks with 18.5, but sometimes you do get concerned about that 1 year of production. He was dominant this year, only this year. Finesse guy, speed, explosiveness, burst, things that the Browns simply don't have. And I think you're talking about somebody, Dan, who's not going to help you out a lot when it comes to slowing down the run. He's going to be a situational pass rusher at the very beginning of his career, and that's something that the Browns need. Although, you ask yourself again, who's scoring the touchdowns?
Yeah, and they want to build that dominant defense.
Yep.
That's what they're going to do. And we know that Ray Farmer, and we can debate this forever and ever. Ray Farmer is not going to take a wide receiver high in the draft. We've seen it for 2 years in a row. He is a guy that believes that you don't need to do that you don't need that type of receiver. And, listen, the Browns receivers weren't amazing last year. They also weren't as bad as people thought they would be. He used free agency. He found some undrafted guys to stick in there, found some veteran guys. He cobbled together a decent wide receiving core. I think they hoped Josh Gordon would give them something when he came back. He didn't. He didn't deliver on the promise that they thought they would get from him and when he returned. This is just a guy that's not going to take receivers high. That's just how it's going to be with Ray Farmer right now. Now, maybe when this is a more finished team, that changes.
Yeah.
But right now, it's just not something he's going to do.
And the other thing is, the Browns look for these guys. We make fun of it a lot, but they have this mantra, play like a Brown.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know what that means, but so far, the first 3 picks that the Browns have taken are all more men, all seniors. Danny Shelton played in the Senior Bowl. Cameron Irving played in the Senior Bowl. Nate Orchard played in the Senior Bowl. And they all did really good in the week of Mobile and during the game. And the Browns seem like they're using that Senior Bowl as an opportunity to see these guys against better competition, get to know these guys. It's a setting that the Browns have used here. It seems they don't want these young guys, these underclassmen, guys who are declaring early. It seems like they want the more polish.
And, again, you go to Ray Farmer's MO. He got past that first round last year, and he got some football players.
Yeah.
That's what you're hoping out of Nate Orchard. He might not be that guy that's going to be out there every single down, like you say, but in the second round at pick number 51, if he can be an effective situational pass rusher, you got yourself a football player. You got yourself a guy that you can plug in
Right.
for the next 5 or 6 years.
And you can look at the speed and you can say 4.8, 40, and what do you mean, Chris? He's not that good. He's not that fast. He's not that athletic. We're talking about somebody who was recruited as a wide receiver. So you know he's athletic enough. You know that he's got that explosiveness in the lower half. He's not that strong, Dan. He's not, as I mentioned, he's not going to help you when it comes to trying to stop the run. But he's that pass rusher that with proper coaching, surrounded by the right guys. Look, Danny Shelton's going to help this kid. The fact that Danny Shelton's going to be on the field taking up blocks, it's going to spring this kid free to maybe get close to double-digit sacks eventually in his career.
Jordan Phillips is the pick for the Dolphins. That's the pick that they got from the Eagles, the nose tackle out of Oklahoma. The Browns, again, addressing defense. Danny Shelton, Nate Orchard, 2 of their 3 picks. Their offensive pick was an offensive lineman, building from the inside out. Like they said, it really feels like, really, Chris, I look at what Ray Farmer's done. And Justin Gilbert obviously didn't work, hasn't worked yet. But even he kind of fits. He had the personal issues, but as far as what he does, he's a defensive player. He's a physical corner, or he should be, a guy that can make plays on the football. He kind of fits what the Browns are building too. If he can get those personal issues in order, who knows? That could still be a good draft pick. But very clearly over the last couple of years, Ray Farmer and Mike Pettin, aside from that Johnny Manziel pick, which is such an outlier, it's really hard to look at that pick and think, sure, Jimmy Haslam didn't make that one.
Yeah.
They have a plan. Whether you trust it, whether you believe in it, that's up to you to decide. But right now, it seems very clear like they have a plan.
They have an identity, and that's what you need. If you think the Baltimore Ravens, Dan, you know exactly what they are. You know exactly how they're going to try and build the team. Pittsburgh Steelers, same thing. The Cincinnati Bengals, in the last 3 to 5 years, Dan, they've established a specific identity. And we had wondered, since the Browns returned really in 1999, who is this team? What are they all about? What are they going to do? We know the answers. Some are choosing to ignore them. Some don't like the answers, and that's fine. I understand that. I'm right there with you. I wanted a running back. I wanted a wide receiver. I wanted more touchdowns because they averaged 18 points per game. But they're sticking with what they truly believe. They want to stop the run, they want to run the ball, and they want to get after the quarterback. And the first 3 picks have followed that script.
Yeah, and you've got to think, too, when they look at this offense, you might love some of these wide receivers, but how much of an impact is Devontae Parker going to have on this team if it's still Josh McCown throwing the football?
Yeah, that's fair.
Maybe they just feel like it's not time. Maybe they feel like they can use those picks to get better in other areas to help them win sooner. I don't know. I'm just kind of trying to talk through maybe what's going through their minds.
And I get that, but I think if you have an opportunity to get a great wide receiver, I don't think you stop yourself because your quarterback stinks. And if that's the way that they're looking at it, I would say that's a flawed perspective. Look, there are guys that go to situations and you don't necessarily know who the quarterback is going to be, but eventually you're hoping you stumble on that guy. And then when you finally do have the quarterback, you already have that wide receiver in place. Yeah. So if there's a great wide receiver, even though the Browns don't have a great quarterback, they don't have the answer at quarterback, I don't think that means pass on the guy, because you're not making the pick only for 2015 or only for 2016. The hope is, Dan, that you're going to have the guy for a decade.
Yeah. He's passed up a lot of talented guys.
He really has.
Receiver. I think you can spend a lot of time talking about the wide receiver position. It can get a little overblown sometimes, but you also, it's perfectly fair if you want to criticize Ray Farmer for a lot of the wide receiver talent that he's left on the board, especially in that first round last year. That's what really hurts you, because the other guys he picked last year, you can make a case for each and every one. The guys in that first round, it's tough to make that case.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I thought it would have made some sense, Dan, for them to consider Jalen Strong. But it's clear that Ray Farmer has a different opinion of Strong, or he's got a different opinion of Nate Orchard here.
All right, the Arizona Cardinals traded up to, they traded number 55 to the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens move up to 55. They get that pick from the Cardinals. The Bengals are currently on the clock. Of course, the Browns' division rival. Something we didn't get to that I said we would get to earlier, and something I know a lot of Browns fans are curious about. Quarterbacks, you said Brett Hundley's the guy that you think will go first. Where's Bryce Petty going to end up?
Buffalo was a team that was linked to him. The New Orleans Saints have been linked to him as well. That might be a little bit too high for a team that has other needs. And then there's the Rams. You got to wonder what the Rams are thinking when it comes to the quarterback spot. They do have Nick Foles. They traded Sam Bradford for Nick Foles. But Nick Foles showed some issues. And you wonder, when you get him out of the system of Chip Kelly, what is he going to be? Is he going to flourish, or is he going to retreat because Chip's such a good offensive mind? So I think the Rams are a team that could be in the hunt for a quarterback here in this draft. And then you think about some teams that might look towards the future, just given the way that things set up. The Green Bay Packers, Dan, are always looking for a backup for Aaron Rodgers or a developmental quarterback. And that's what Bryce Petty is. He is the true definition of a developmental quarterback. He's not ready this year. He's not going to be ready next year, but maybe 3, 4, 5 years down the road, if you get the proper coaching, then maybe he turns into something. So it's that kind of team. The team that's already set at quarterback that can be looking 3, 4 years down the road.
And then, of course, there's the guy that played in the pro-style offense that everybody loves, Garrett Grayson.
I don't know. I just don't get it, Dan. I don't get what people see in Garrett Grayson. He's a guy that fumbles a lot. He's got this funky windup, too. And if you're talking about in the NFL, ask Byron Leftwich about it. You can get away with that funky windup in college. Tim Tebow, same kind of thing. But if you're late by a half second, that means the defensive player can knock that ball out of your hands. That means the defensive player can close on the wide receiver. That's the difference sometimes between a completion and an interception. And I just think it's so hard to change a guy's mechanics. Can it happen? Absolutely. They did it with Aaron Rodgers. He's completely different throwing the football than he was when he came out of Cal. But that funky windup, man, that's an issue for me.
I know I'm always hard on the guy, but look at Blake Bortles, if you want an example of that.
Yeah.
That's a guy that has that windup.
I didn't love him.
Cornerbacks just sit on that. You
Yeah.
try and run a comeback route or something like that, cornerbacks just sit on it. And you saw Blake Bortles throw a lot of interceptions on little routes like that, where the cornerback had time to read him, see that arm start to wind up. They get there a whole lot faster than they did when he was at Central Florida.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons, Dan, why I didn't like him last year. I had Derek Carr rated above him, actually. I thought Derek Carr had more NFL traits than Blake Bortles. Now, Blake went 3rd overall. Jacksonville obviously believes in him. They feel like they have their quarterback of the future. He can get better. There's no question about that. He can continue to develop. But there are certain traits that I look for, and I just don't think Garrett Grayson has them.
Jake Fisher goes to Cincinnati, the tackle out of Oregon, 6'6", 306 pounds. So Cincinnati, they want to protect their quarterbacks.
Another one. Yep. That's 2 offensive tackles for the Bengals. And we talked about it last night when they took Ogbuhi from Texas A&M. They've got 2 tackles right now. Andrew Whitworth is 33 years old. He's probably going to retire at the end of this season. He's not in the long-term plans, Dan. And then you've got Andre Smith, a former top 10 pick. He's going to be a free agent at the end of this season. Are they going to invest money in him, or are they going to let him walk? If he walks in free agency, now you covered yourself.
Amir Abdullah, the running back out of Nebraska, goes to Detroit at 54. Now we get to the Ravens, who traded up to this pick at 55. Again, they're trading up to get somebody. Who are they trading up for?
I'm looking at the Ravens, and they took Perriman yesterday in the first round. I'm thinking it's going to be, it would have been maybe a defensive tackle since they lost to Lodinata, but I think Phillips coming off the board changes that equation, and the Ravens aren't a team that tends to reach, and I don't see another defensive tackle that would make a lot of sense. Maybe Carl Davis from Iowa, a kid who had a really, really good Senior Bowl, 6'4", 320, powerful, not a lot of production. Maybe him, but I'm thinking cornerback, somebody in the secondary. I thought they were a team that could have considered one of the cornerbacks in the late first round yesterday, and maybe they go with a guy like P.J. Williams from Florida State, a kid that I like, Quentin Rollins out of Miami of Ohio. You're talking about somebody, Dan, who was a basketball player for 4 years. He played basketball for Miami of Ohio, and then he's got 1 year and he decides that he's going to play some football. He plays football for Miami this past year, and all that happens, he turns into the MAC Defensive Player of the Year. I think scouts really, really like him and what he was able to do in just 1 year of playing football. Amazing. He's somebody that could fit the Ravens too.
Ravens didn't have to give up a whole lot to move up 3 spots. The Cardinals get the 58th pick, and then they get the 158th pick. That's in the 5th round. So the Ravens only gave up essentially a 5th rounder here to move up 3 spots and get the player they wanted, whoever that might be. We'll see what Ozzie Newsome is thinking. So what good GMs do, they see guys, they go get them in these late rounds. It's hard to do in the first round, but when you start getting into the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, the draft starts moving along. It's a little easier to kind of move up and down because teams are a little more scattered as to what they're looking for.
I think this Abdullah pick has some ramifications for the Browns. You're talking about the 4th best running back. Doesn't have great size, 5'9", but he's decisive, he's patient, and he can catch out of the backfield. That's the big thing. I felt like Isaiah Crowell didn't do a good enough job of that last year. I don't think Terrence West did a good enough job of that last year. So if you're trying to bring in somebody who's got some skills that you don't currently have on the roster, I thought Abdullah would have made some sense for the Browns here in round 2, maybe even round 3. He's off the board, and it makes a lot of sense that he goes to Detroit because Detroit wants to throw the ball all over the yard.
Yeah.
They play in that dome. They've got Calvin Johnson. They've got Golden Tate. They've got Matthew Stafford. They're a team that runs the ball on less than 40% of their downs, so they have to have a running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield.
Somebody in the comments made this call. It made a lot of sense to me. Max Williams is going to the Baltimore Ravens.
Okay, that's a good one.
So
Good job.
They go with the tight end, and Joe Flacco, he loves his tight ends.
Doesn't he? A lot of quarterbacks love the tight end. It's a nice little safety blanket.
Yeah. When you got a good one, you can do a lot of damage with that guy. We even saw it with Brian Hoyer, of all people. When he had a healthy Jordan Cameron, even those two could do some damage.
And that's smart to move in front of Pittsburgh for him, too. Because Pittsburgh could have used a tight end, obviously. Arizona, they could have used a tight end. Rob Hausler, big-time Rob Hausler, now here in Cleveland.
Your guy.
Denver probably could have used a tight end because they lose Julius Thomas. So you had some teams there drafting around Baltimore, and they said, hey, you know what? We're not going to risk it. We see some teams there that could be a threat for Max Williams. Let's move up. Let's grab them. I think that's what you're going to see from Ray Farmer with all of these picks moving forward, a move like this that Baltimore just made.
Here's an interesting tweet about the Bengals going back to their pick. If health holds for them, they won't get a single start out of their 1st or 2nd round pick.
That's true. But they're at a different spot.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? If you're talking about the Browns, they need guys who can step in and play right away. If you're talking about the Tennessee Titans, they need guys who can step in and play right away. Tampa Bay, same thing. If you're a team like Cincinnati and you've been to the playoffs 3 straight years, ever since you drafted Andy Dalton and A.J. Green in the same draft, you can look ahead towards the future.
Does Randy Gregory feel like a Steelers pick? Because it's being suggested right now by Ryan Gladish in our comments.
Well, they took Bud Dupree.
Yeah, that's true.
But they also had Jason Worlds retire. And I don't think they were thinking that was going to happen at all. If you think about a couple of years ago, they took Jarvis Jones in round 1. Boy, that's a lot of resources for that one spot in the first 2 rounds.
They're a team that doesn't need a ton offensively, though. They do need some help in that secondary.
They need the secondary big time, Dan.
They could always use offensive line help. There's a lot of ways the Steelers could go.
Mm-hmm.
It'll be interesting to see what they do coming up. Max Williams to the Ravens. So Browns fans, twice a year, this team is going to have to cover Max Williams and Rashad Perryman. You get Joe Flacco weapons.
Oof.
He's not at the level of the elite quarterbacks in the NFL, but he's a guy that has won the Super Bowl. He's a guy that's got a big arm. He'll elicit some groans from Ravens fans every now and again, but you give him weapons, and he can do some big things for you.
Well, you always hate when you see some of those guys going to division rivals. The old saying is...
Especially when it makes so much sense. When you look at it, it's like, yeah, that works.
Yeah. So the old saying is, Dan, if you're going to pass on a guy, whoever it may be, just be ready to play against him. The Browns passed on Perriman because they wanted Cameron Irving. Now they're going to have to play against him. The Browns passed on Max Williams because they wanted Nate Orchard. Now they're going to have to play against him.
Steve Zorchik tweets, Orchard was a runaway as a kid. Credits huge turnaround to adoptive family. Got to know Paul Kruger when the latter hung out with the Utes last summer.
That's right.
So there you go. There's a good little story for the Browns' second round draft pick. Thanks for posting that into the comments. Marvin Lewis says that the Bengals will prove themselves right with Jake. Marvin Lewis is a confident dude. That's one thing. Well, no matter what you think of him as a coach, he's a confident guy.
Jake went 53. Not a lot that you have to prove there when you go 53. I mean, it's a guy who could have snuck into the back end of the first round, maybe even the top of the second round. I don't know about this proving thing. I don't think a lot of people are questioning the pick of Jake Fisher, are they?
I don't know. Again, Marvin Lewis, man, he likes to. It's just kind of how he is.
Yeah.
He's a confident guy. He calls people names.
One person in particular being Johnny Manziel. Sure.
Looking through some tweets here, someone tweeted, I saw it earlier, that Max Williams basically makes the Ravens draft. He's a guy that they really wanted. Jason LaCanfora, the Ravens came into this draft bereft of pass catchers, had to invest in them heavily here. That's what you can do when you're a team that doesn't have needs everywhere, when you just have a few that you can target. It makes life easier, especially when you're picking later in these rounds than a team like the Browns.
That's going to be a dangerous one. And now you wonder if you're a team like the Browns, if you're a team like the Bengals and the Steelers, knowing that they have that guy, does that mean some focus turns to, we got to find a linebacker who's going to be able to cover that guy, or we've got to find a safety who's going to be able to cover that guy?
Okay, so we are waiting the Steelers pick here. We want to see what they do. Then I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll take a break after that, and then we'll let you hear from Cameron Irving, the other Browns first-round pick from yesterday. He was in Berea today. So we'll let you hear from him as soon as we see what the Steelers do with the 56th pick. Then the Rams will make the pick at 57. The Cardinals will pick at 58. The Browns, as of right now, will not pick again until the third round. As we've mentioned a few times, though, watch those 3 fourth-rounders. I don't know if they're going to make 3 fourth-round picks this year.
Right. And if you're spinning it forward for the Browns, obviously wide receiver still makes sense for them. Inside linebacker is another one. Now, I know they grabbed Kirksey, but Carlos Dansby is not going to be on this defense forever. So running back also, if they want to go that direction, if they want to add a third guy to the mix, somebody who can do some of the things that West and Crow can't do.
Yeah, again, it's a team with a lot of needs, so you can't fill them all. And then the other thing, too, when you kind of look at this draft, let's say the Browns make 8 picks in this draft.
Yeah.
Let's say they just end. Let's throw that number out there. Obviously, they had 10 coming in. Let's say they end up making a trade here and there, and it ends up being 8 picks. How many of those do you think actually pan out to make this a successful draft?
You want at least half.
Yeah.
You want at least half, and I think given the way that the first round went last year, Dan, With Johnny Manziel and Justin Gilbert, I think it's very, very important for two of those halves to be those two guys, Danny Shelton and Cameron Irving.
Yeah, well, to me, those first two picks have to work. If you're going to take those guys at those positions, they got to work. You can't waste those picks on defensive line, offensive line, and have them fail. Especially, again, you passed up guys that also could have helped your team. So I think they got to nail those two picks.
All right, so if we're thinking forward when it comes to the Browns, here's what they have shown us. They don't love underclassmen, okay?
Yeah.
They're looking for the veterans, guys with a lot of playing experience, guys that love football, maybe guys that have been to the Senior Bowl. If you think about Danny Shelton, he played in 39 straight games at Washington. Nate Orchard played in all 50 games during his college career. So they're looking for that kind of experience. The more knowns they can have, I think the better. After the whole Johnny Manziel thing, he was a big-time projection, Dan. He was a projection. You had to say, okay, is his skill set going to translate to the next level? Justin Gilbert, he was a big-time projection as well because what you were banking on was the length, the athleticism, the makeup speed. You weren't looking at the technique. You weren't looking at the fundamentals. So I think they learned from that whole first round. So if we're spinning it forward to round 3 and you're thinking about players that could make sense for the Browns, look for those kinds of clues, I would say.
I keep going back to Justin Gilbert. Those things you mentioned about him, they were evident at times.
Yes.
You saw those things. When you look at his personal issue, if he gets right, the physical skills are there. The problem with Johnny Manziel is if he's right, we aren't sure if the physical skills are there. That's still a big question mark. All right, Sinquez Golson, the pick for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they do address that secondary. We will talk about that. We'll hear from Cameron Irving. First, we're going to take a quick break.